I want to present to you the idea that Katahdin, which has always been known and honored by the native people as a sacred mountain, I want to present to you the idea that I believe that this mountain is a transmitter of that truth frequency that I was speaking about. And I'd like to give my thoughts on what mysticism is, because it's one of those words that sort of sits out there and who knows what it means. And to me, it's like a frequency, and it doesn't matter where. It's like a radio wave, that it doesn't matter where you are on the planet, when you've been on this planet, that when you tune into this frequency, you get the same information. It's like driving down the highway of life and tuning up that radio, and sometimes it has static, and sometimes it's clear, and sometimes it's not there at all. And I believe that all of us hear this frequency at some point, in some ways in our lives, and that our great leaders and great authors and great artists have tapped into that frequency to a point where they've taken it public, and it's directed their actions, and that is what has made them great. Everyone who goes on that mountain, or those who have their receivers, their systems set on receive as opposed to send, get information and get feelings and get a sense. People say that mountain is alive, that mountain has a character of its own. Some say they see God when they go on that mountain. It's almost universal that people have an extraordinary sense of this mountain. And it's known that mountains, and there are areas throughout the world that are vortexes of energy. And I believe that Katahdin is a vortex of this frequency of truth.
How did Mount Katahdin influence the life and thinking of Henry David Thoreau?
Thoreau famously stayed at Walden Pond for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days between 1845 and 1847, almost exactly halfway between the period of time. If you take both ends and meet in the middle, about halfway during Thoreau's stay at the pond, he went to the Maine woods, his first trip to the Maine woods.
Kind of like a vacation halfway through his experiment at Walden Pond. And the high point of that trip for him was his climb of Mount Katahdin, which he wrote about later in an excursion or an essay that he wrote called simply enough Katahdin. It's the first chapter of the Maine Woods. The summit of the essay is Thoreau's fairly well known. How many people know the contact passage? Okay, I'm going to read it here in a second. Never heard of it. Basically what it is Thoreau's account of going from Concord all the way up to Maine, and then the climb of the mountain. On his way up Katahdin, he was going with a party that he was with, and then the other members of the party fell behind, and Thoreau continued up through the clouds, went up onto a tableland. We don't know for sure if he actually achieved what we now know as the summit, but nonetheless he thought he was at the summit, and he was standing up there looking at this very strange landscape. If anyone's ever been up there, I think it's fair to say it looks otherworldly. It's a very unusual landscape. This experience of seeing that landscape under the circumstances that he saw the landscape obviously caused certain feelings in him.
Thoreau is up there and he has this almost sort of out-of-body experience, but I would call it an otherworldly experience. He, in a sense, lifts the veil from his perceptions and is able to have a kind of a direct relationship with the environment, and to see, as I put it in an introduction that I wrote for one of his later books, he's able to see the miraculous in the commonplace.
I want to put it in a particular context. In Walden, Thoreau says that he went to the woods to live deliberately and front only the essential facts of life. And at the end of the paragraph, he says that once he had fronted the essential facts of life, if he found them were sublime, he would write them up in his next excursion. And the next excursion he wrote after he wrote that paragraph, of course, was Katahdin. So in a sense, I think it's somewhat fair to say that this passage that I'm going to read here in a second is one of the essential facts that Thoreau learned when he was at the pond, or during his experiment at the pond.
I stand in awe of my body, he writes. This matter to which I am bound has become so strange to me. I fear not spirits, ghosts, of which I am one, that my body might, but I fear bodies. I tremble to meet them. What is this Titan that has possession of me? Talk of mysteries, think of our life and nature, daily to be shown matter, to come in contact with it. Rock, trees, wind on our cheeks, the solid earth, the actual world, the common sense. Contact, contact. Who are we? Where are we? This is kind of, I think for Thoreau, this is kind of a seminal experience, an experience that you have out in the world that gets you down to some of the most foundational, fundamental questions that even involve who you are, questions of identity, epistemology. I mean, again, some of the most philosophically basic questions.
In Thoreau's studies, this is a very controversial passage. It's been written about by many different scholars. Not the consensus, well, I guess it is a consensus. Most of the scholars who read this assert that Thoreau here is traumatized by what he sees on top of the mountain. I happen to think they're dead wrong myself. I think, and maybe I'll read myself here, because I think instead of trying to get it off the top of my head, I'll just tell you what I think. The carefully crafted prose of the contact passage reflects not emotional turmoil, but the finer frenzy of Thoreau the Transcendentalist prophet, straining the capabilities of language to describe what Emerson called the original relation to the universe he, Thoreau, experienced atop the mountain. This important passage is Thoreau's attempt to articulate the ineffable. For Thoreau on Mount Katahdin, like Moses on Mount Sinai, had beheld God, or spirit, and nature, or matter, face to face. So you can see I have a somewhat unconventional or different interpretation of the contact passage.
You have Moses on top of Mount Sinai, basically, being able to look at the Holy Land, those sorts of things. But on Mount Sinai, Moses is up there and actually has, in the Jewish Judeo-Christian tradition, actually speaks with God, experiences and communicates with the divine. And that's what's going on, I think, with Thoreau. He's tapping into that. He's trying to use the same, he's trying to use that tradition to deepen the flow of his own narrative. In other words, you have Thoreau on Mount Katahdin, you have Moses on Mount Sinai. There's a correspondence between the two, and Thoreau is attempting to leverage that correspondence to basically make his own essay a scripture. Well, what Thoreau's doing here in Katahdin, I think, and frankly in a lot of his best writing, is he's trying to tap into this whole experience that you could call the prophetic tradition. In the prophetic tradition, at least from a Judeo-Christian point of view, you have the prophet who is a part of civilization and separates himself or herself from civilization, goes out into the wilderness, and in the Judeo-Christian tradition for 40 days and 40 nights into the wilderness and eats locusts and honey, and then comes back. But while they're in the wilderness, they have this kind of a foundational experience, and they're able to see through the appearance of things to the reality and bring that spiritual truth back into the human community and tell people in that community what's real as opposed to what appears to be. The insight that all nature is miraculous, and bring it into contemporary American life.